Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today we're learning Masechta Zevachim daf Tes Vav. We are going to begin on Yud Dalid Amud Beis by the dot, about 10 lines on the bottom with Iboilahu. So we were learning in yesterday's daf, past couple of dafim, that when it comes to the Arba Voidais, when it comes to the Avoda of Hilacha, of transferring the dam to the Mizbech in order that the Zrika would take place. So if a person has an improper machshava at the time of the hoylacha, at the time of bringing, is that considered to be a psul? So the Mishnah discussed this and said different opinions, but perhaps one simple approach is just looking at whether or not it's something in which is potential that can just be skipped altogether, which is one of the opinions. And therefore, if you could just simply be makriv, you can do the shchita mamish right near the mizbech, so you can skip the halacha completely, and therefore the fact that you do halacha is not really such a big deal. Therefore, also when we discussed a non-kohen, we asked what's the din of a non-kohen, a zar, is he able to do halacha? So we ended up saying yesterday's daf the halacha bazar psula, that even according to Rav Shimon doesn't make any difference, it's still possible. Now, Iboilahu Hilacha Shlo B'Regel Shema Hilacha Lo Shema Hilacha. This is discussed in Masechta Yomi and other places, that in the event that you don't need to move, but of course, let's say you're Makabel the Dam in your Kli Sharis, and you just transfer it by hand and then do the Zrika, is that considered to be a Hilacha? In that will cause a psul if you have an improper machshava, or questionable whether or not it's an issue of a zar to be able to do this, which leads us straight to our first question. Question TA24. Yiboy halacha shul v'regel shmo halacha lo ilbeis kulos yesh b'mash deloy habi halacha. So one is, if it's not hoylacha, then it's not going to puzzle with the machshav. And also, if a zar does it, or someone who's a puzzle, and it's going to say yachal lakser l'hoishit l'kasher. So even if he did it wrong, but can you go retract and do it again? So we're going to see that in the Gemara. So again, the question is, what's the status of hoylacha shaloi b'regel? So tashma v'chein yoshev v'chein small puzzle. So as we saw in the very top of this Amud, that not only are all these different parts of the Avoda not allowed by a zar or by an oinen, but also someone cannot be doing the Avoda sitting or using their left hand. Ha'oimed, domid yoshev kosher. Standing kabul, the sitting is kosher. So what does that mean? The oimed, domid yoshev. So Rashi says like this: V'chein koyin yoshev katani the possible hilacha ha'oimed de'enu moilech ela b'hoishit yad domi the yoshev kosher. If let's say you're just moving your hand, alma shmo hilacha, that's comparable to that would be allowed, and therefore, but it's considered to be a form of hilacha of movement. So that's what we're trying to derive from here, that ha'oimid domid yoshev kosher. No, domid yoshev is the kashayev shiaf, that it's like he drags himself. Oimid domid yoshev denied porta. He actually is moving a little bit. Okay, Tashma shachad Yisrael. So the yid a non-kohen does the shchita, which is allowed. Shchita b'zar is kosher. V'kibul ha'kohen. And then Kohen does the Kabbalah. Nasl Chavero gives to his friend, Chavero. So he's passing it from one to the next, one to the next, and on to the next. And Rashi says, Tani Hasam, Kohanim Oimdim Shurais, that they have to be standing. Now, why is that necessary? It's Shlo B'Regel, they're not moving. So maybe that shows that it's necessary, because even though they're not moving, that is considered to be hoylach, and therefore they have to be standing. No, Hasam Nami did 90 porta. So no, they're moving a little bit. Since they're moving, so it's not really considered shlo b'regel. So my kamash one, just coming to tell you Pashit, that there's an inyan that when it comes to doing the avoda, not just one person does it, but to get more people involved. Okay, that's all it's telling you. Tashma, kibel hakosher. Let's say a kosher kohen is makabel the dam, v'nosin l'psul, and he gives it over to someone who's apostle. Yasel kosher, you can give it back to the kosher. So what does that mean? So Rashi says, "Vashmi'in tarti ba." So we learn out two things. Chada do misol b'may diafsiki psul. So it had a kosher sandwicing a psul, apostle person. So you had kosher, apostle, kosher. So the fact that the middle guy, if you would have removed the middle guy, just the kosher did the whole thing would have been fine. The question is the fact that you have apostle in the middle, does that kind of mess everything up? So the first point is that's not considered to be a hefsek, if you will. That this movement kosher, that the kosher person moves shubba regel because he handed over to apostle. She oimid b'tzad hamizbeach, and he's standing right by the mizbeach. Lo nasis behechsher v'lo shema halacha. It's not considered to be halacha because v'iyah halacha shubba regel shema halacha, says Rashi. If by not moving it's still considered like moving, l'may yachzirena l'achar. Why would you give it back? Right? Let him just go right onto the mizbech. So it must be that it's considered to be halacha. So ema yakser hakasher yikablena. All we're saying is let him be makabel by the side of mizbech, and that's it. Itmar. So we end up saying that this is the din, that even though you're now moving, we do not consider it to be as moving, right? It's not considered to be hoylacha. And because of that, Rashi says, V'ein machshava mefkeluspa. If you have a improper machshava, pigel, shaloi bizman, so the din is it doesn't do anything. And the reality is that because it's not considered to be hoylacha, it's not attached to an avoda, and therefore it's not an issue. As we continue to test Manal. Why? Esher was with takuna. He says the reason is that you could, because the question is Esher takuna or lo Esher takuna. Could we fix it, like redo the mistake, or should we not redo the mistake? Says Rashi, Ben she'asa zar, ben she'asa kain, whoever did it, Amrina in hoylacha, it's not considered to be a movement. Upsula the hanasis shul kihilchasa. We're not going to say it's puzzle, but it wasn't done properly. Mihu yeshul takana lachzil acharel lachzil lohoyach beregel, and maybe you could fix it and actually go back and do it properly. Tashma kibul hakasher v'nasan l'psul. Let's say a kosher accepts it and gives it to an apostle. Yasel kosher. Now nihina midiyasa the kosher hakosher yikablenu. So granted that also he gives it back to the kosher and he accepts it. If it's not possible to fix, so ifsula. So the apostle person should passel it forever. So the fact that it says you can give it back to a kosher and then it works obviously shows that's efshel skuna. So no, misavit dekoi zar gavoy, lo dekoi zar baroy. You're telling me that the zar, the non-kohen, is on the inside? No, he's on the outside. Okay, let's see. It says Rashi, who says that he's litzan hamizbeach, shehikriv harishain b'hoshatas litzan hamizbeach, that all he's doing is, you all have to do is move, and therefore it shows you that it's there's no halacha. Maybe the zar is outside. The kosher shahishit, the kosher is shahishit lo harchika min hamizbeach. The kosher one has to bring to the mizbeach. Hilkach lav halacha havoy liv soil. V'chi pashtinan yaser kosher v'telena v'zar ma'isa itztabahu de'avad. As we saw in yesterday's daf, 2 is that even if you hold a non-kohen can be holding the dam, it doesn't mean he's moving it. He's just like an itztaba, like a platform, but he's just not moving it. He's holding it so that when the person who's going to do this rika can come and take it from him. Okay. Itmar, Omer Ulam Rav Yochanan, Halacha Shul Beregel, when it comes to movement with your feet, Psula, Itaka could passel, which sounds like, even if you're not moving. So Alma lo efshel tkuna. Obviously, the fact that it says it's possible means it cannot be fixed. Esvei Rav Nachman Ula nishmach min a kli. Let's say it spills out from the vessel al haritzba onto the floor of osvu, and then you gather up the blood kosher. Now, why? Because once you put it back into the kli, that's good. This is cited as a Mishnah. It says Rashi goes nishmach, when it spills, when it's pashit beritzba, niskari v'tzadim mizbech v'katani kosher. It drips and it goes toward the mizbech naturally. But the kanta sagila. So hachmaiskinan kishiyetzel chutz. We're talking about where it's on the outside. And therefore, it says Rashi, when it spilled, it wasn't right next to the Mizbech. Rather, it was far away. Okay. Lebroi nafik. So you're saying that it went out on the outside. Gavoy l'ayil. The inside will not go. Says Rashi, Chiyesh l'adam soul sheyishboich v'yishpashet l'chol stadin. If it's going to spill, it's going to spill naturally on all sides. So it is going to get to the Mizbech. So makar b'makar midroin. So maybe we're talking about where it was on an incline, and therefore it's gonna just continue to go away. Alternatively, it fell into a hole, and therefore it's not gonna spread out. Maybe it's a thick blood that will not move. So the ichbol tanashmin and kolhani. So that's what the Tana's come to tell us. Void. Adatani beidach pirkin, we learn in another parak, nishbach al haritzba. Let's say the blood spills out from the neck of an animal, the osvu, and you gather it up. It says posel. So liflik bidida. Why don't we make a distinction with the thing itself and say b'medabar morim kishiatzel chutz of a nichnas lifnim posel, right? Maybe there's a distinction between on the outside and the inside. So tiyufta. So that taka is a kasha. Says Rashi, Ela midoloi eshkach psul el matzaver behema shema mina nishmach min a kli. If it spills from a kli, loshna nafak abrai, loshna ayel gavoy kosher. Doesn't make a difference. It's always kosher, and that's a tiyufta on Ula, who, as we established, of Itmar Ulam Rav Yochanan haylacha shel beregel lo shema haylacha. That's not considered to be haylacha. We see over here, apparently it is. Okay. Itmar, haylacha shel beregel, maybe the din of the movement shel beregel is a machlokes Rav Shimon Rabbanan. It's a machlokes. Bahaylacha ravti kol yamul pligi the psul. So he says that when it comes to a haylacha, says Rashi, Ravti maskan hila milsa the Rav V'yamer dechi pog Rav Shimon Rabbanan b'halacha zutrasa with a small walking, right? So pligi sheshachah b'tzad mizbeach the zar tahaynu shul beregel without having to move. Of a halacha Ravti and hanu beregel lo pligi. If you actually had to move your feet, then in that case they do not argue, right? With actually like walking, right? So then it is considered to be definitely halacha. Well, pligi the psula. Therefore, if you have a machshava, it's going to definitely possible because if you need to walk, everyone holds it's not good. If you have a machshava, because that's part of the integral part of the avoda. Ki pligi b'halacha zutrasi. When we're dealing with like a small movement, so machol ebamrav, they kind of scoffed at this and they said, El chatas oif. When it comes to the chatas offering of a bird, which Rashi says the possible machshava bahazos dama, that just sprinkling the blood, which is the ikra of the avoda of the chatas oif, having improper machshava at that point will posel it. So if that's the case, machshava Rav Shimon heicha mishkachas. What exactly is this machshava? If he's thinking about it before the blood comes out, lo klumi, because it wasn't at the time of the zrika. V'i basad nafek dam is avid le mitzvasai. If it's afterwards, the mitzvah is already done. Says Rashi. The kivan the time of Rav Shimon mishum the halachas which Rasul will pasel ba machshava heichi pasel bach. How can it ever become pasel? So my kush, what is the question? Dilma midipirish v'ad matel mizbech. Maybe from the time the blood was separated until it reaches during the mizbech. That's the time. The habamini Rav Yomi and Rav Zera hayamaz. The person sprinkling v'nikta'a yadai shel mazeh, and the kohen's hand basically gets cut off. Ad shel hegia dam la'aver hamizbech, until the blood hits the mizbech. Mal v'yarmelei psula. My timer, because this is he's v'nasan be'inan. It needs to have the sprinkler in the sina at the same time. So that would be a problem. But because at the time of the sinas dam, this guy was already a balmum, and therefore it's a psul. Kiyos Rav Papa Rav Huna Rav Yeshua Mebei Rav Amri Hainu Chucha. This was the laughter. Because V'Haylacha Ravdi L'Pligi, you want to tell me they don't argue when it talks about movement, when they're actually moving. V'Ki Pligi V'Haylacha Ravdi Pligi. But they're clearly they are arguing about this particular situation when there is movement. Says Rashi. Okay. Small movement, no one argues. The low pasel. In that case, it will not pasel. If you look in Rashi over here, the pasel garcinan, it's maybe not the low, but it is pasel. Okay. So haylichu zar, hechziru kayin. So let's say the non-kohen does the first movement, and then the kohen brings it back, and then he brings it back. So pligaba b'nei Rav Chia Rav Yana echada imer kashem chada imer pasel. Marsav Rav Shelo Tikuna. Marsav Rav Shelo Tikuna. The fact that the non-kohen did it, which is not what he wasn't supposed to do. The question is that can it be brought back and forth, and therefore undo that mistake. Okay, fine. However, let's say what about this case? That it was done properly already, and therefore maybe that was already done, and now a non-kohen goes back and forth. Some Rav Shimon because the one who said before it was kosher by the case of the zar doing it first and then the kohen. So it's the fixing it does, the second action does something. So over here, the second action of in this case, the second action of the zar does something to pasel it. And the other one who's l'divya poisel machshir, the one who says that the fact that in the first case, where the kohen did something that it doesn't help, so also over here, the zar who does it afterwards also doesn't help, and it stays kosher. Rabbi Pasul. No, even the one who says it's pasul, because the original action was done by a zar. So he would also say, because the second action doesn't do anything, he would also say that if the original action was a kohen, even though you would think the second action shouldn't do anything, it should be kosher. No, he also holds his pasul. Well, my timer. Why? What is the reason for that? It's because Datsarich, as we continue to test Vavum Bebeis, La'am Tuyay, that we need to bring it back to the Mizbeach, not with a zar. And therefore, the fact is, even though it's true the kohen did it correctly the first time, but now the zar, maybe the zar brings it back, brings it away, and then a kohen brings it back, that's different. But over here, the zar is bringing it back to the mizbech. That's the problem. Amar Rabbi Yirmi Rav Hashi Hachi Amar Rabbi Yirmi Medifti Hatzarech Lam Tuye Machlokes Rabbi Elazar Rabbanan. The whole notion of is it necessary for the Kohen himself to bring it back to the Mizbeach is the Machlokes. That not. Rabbi Elazar Amar Hamahalech B'Makom Shesarech Halech. If you're going to the place where you need to do halacha machshava poiselas, because you're actually doing something, that's integral to the avoda is the halacha. Makom shein tzarcha halech, because let's say it's right next to mizbech and machshava poiselas. V'yom Rava hakol moedim, everyone agrees that kibul b'chutz. Let's say you did the kabbalah sadam outside, v'achnisu b'fnim, and you brought it in, zehu hilach shesarach halech, and therefore it will possibly be because it was far away. Kibul bifnim, but if you're makabel right inside, v'oitzil chutz, even though you brought it out, zeu hilach she'in sarach halich. In that case, it's in sarach halich. Even though you brought it out and in, it still doesn't matter, and therefore it will not passel. L'nechol ella kishich nisu v'chazim v'hoitziu. It's in a situation where you brought it in, then you went and took it out again. Mar sever hot sarach lam tuyet. That's necessary to bring it back to the mizbeach, not with a zar. Mar several love kihilach hitzrach la'avoid dami. Rabbi Elazar Malach Malcham Shesarcha Halach Mashava Moseles. So Ketzad Kibul B'chutz. So Ketzad Kibul B'chutz. You're makabel on the outside. V'achnis lefnim, you brought in. Zeu hilach Shesarcha Halach. Kibul b'fnim v'hoitzil chutz. You brought it out. Zeu hilach she'ein sarach leilach. That's something which is not necessary. Now, this third time, chaz v'achnisu, that you brought it back, should tzarcha halechu. It's a case where it's tzarcha halech. Armei itanya tanya. Okay. If that's what it says, that's what it says. Look at Rashi. Lav kihilach the tzarcha v'edadam yihoil the sholot tzarech hoitzi al chinam hutzach lachsal achnisum. So ki tanya itanya the moida bar Rabbi Elazar tanya. If that's what he says, fine. In machlokes Rabbi Elazar tanakama elam Rav Shimon Avu koi upoli. Okay. All right. We're gonna obviously stop there. Let's maybe see a couple questions. Okay. Question 13. Ma hapirish haylacha zitrasi v'haylacha ravti. What does that mean? So haylacha zitrasi is halacha without movement. Haylacha ravti is haylacha beregel, with a movement. So we ended up saying that, and there's different gearses that it says v'haylacha zitrasi without moving koyamul pligi. If you're not moving, the loy puzzle, which seems like the more logical girsa. Okay, Rashi says different. Ki pligi b'haylacha d'ravti. The machlokas is if you are moving. Okay, but if you don't need to move, it seems a little bit more muchach, like the lashon of the Gemara. The loy puzzle, ayin Rashi, which has the girsa of the puzzle garsinan. Okay, so anyway, fine. So that's that. And then question 14, Kibel b'chutz. So you're makabel it outside, and then you brought it inside. Then you took it out, and you brought it back in again. Which one is l'tzarech sheyisul ba machshava, and which one is shaloi l'tzarech? So the first one is l'tzarech, because going l'chutz lifnim, that you needed to do because you were far away. However, the second time you took it out, and then you brought it again, that shni is shaloi l'tzarech. That time is shaloi l'tzarech. However, the shlishis is l'tzarech. So let's read this again. You're makabel b'chutz, and you brought it inside, v'choyz v'hoitziu, and you went and took it out, v'choyz v'hechnisu, and then you went a third time and you brought it in. So the second time is obviously not l'tzarech. But the second time that you're achnisu, that is also l'tzarech. But the notion of when you're bringing it out, from in to out, then that is not considered to be l'tzarech. Okay. Maybe another question. Let's see. TA25 maybe. Ha'im eshel sakein. Can you fix up haylacha shel beregel? If you have halacha without movement, that's nothing. Oy hayleches zar. So haylacha shelo beregel where you're not moving, so efshel l'sachna. That we end up saying, right, that if it's shelo b'regel, let's find this, halacha shelo b'regel, so originally up top it says, Amar Ula, Amar Rabbi, halacha shelo b'regel, psul alma lo efshel l'sachna. However, we end up saying a tiyufta on Ula, and Taka saying that that's not true, right? It's a tiyufta, because it says, let's get this down, Nishvach ha-ritzba, if it's spilled from the neck onto the floor, and you gather it up, it's possible, right? So, why does it say that case? It should be liflig b'didei, b'medavar amurim kashetzel chutz, of nichnas lifnim, possible. So we see from here that it makes no difference, and that's the tiyufta. Let's see if there's Rashi helps me out with that a little bit. Okay. Okay. So that's the idea behind that. That's TA 25. Okay. Which again discusses halacha shel b'regel, but we hold maskana that it's efshel l'sachna, and halacha zar is actually a machlokas. Okay, and TB 27 hazayis chatas oif imasi chayil ba machshavas pigol maskana. So chatas oif, let's get this down. So by chatas oif, let's find where we are here. By chatas oif. See where we are here. No. So the kasha is by chatas oif, hazois oif, chatas oif, imoso chayil bo machshavas pigol maskana. I wrote rak b'soif imasna beisten al zeh sheinu chal el b'soif. So maybe that's actually not in our Gemara. Okay, we'll have to see in tomorrow's daf. Hanu lakol hazayichin, hanu lakol hazvachim, hanu lakol hazvachim. Finish the first parak, not an easy one. Maybe the second one's a little bit easier. Kol hazvachim shekiblu daman zar oinin v'tul yoim mechusar kipporim mechusar begadim shul rachas edem raglayim oral tami yoshev oimed al gabi kelim al gabi behemo al gabi ragli chaveru apostle. Adkan.